we're just checking for the audio for Shashi Tharoor.
Yes, am I properly audible?
Yes, you're good. You're good.
All right, so he'll be here in 10-15 minutes.
Okay. Okay.
All right.
Thank you. So where is Mark Tully? You're not you have to unmute yourself. We still don't have Mark and Dr. Karan Singh.
Mark is here.
Where? Oh, there he is. Came on. So now we just need Dr. Karan Singh. Hello, Mark. Good to see you there. I don't know if you can see us.
Yes, ask him to unmute.
Can you unmute yourself, please? Can you unmute yourself? Can you do it from here? Unmute him? No.
He's
no.
done it.
Yeah, that's
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Good. Can you just say a couple of things so we check?
Yes, I'm going to talk for 3 or 4 minutes plus, I hope not too plus, about the 5 dreams of Sri Aurobindo, broadcast on Auroville Radio on the 14th of August, 1947.
You're a little bit muffled.
Sorry?
The sound is slightly muffled, so we just check it out. Wait.
I'll tell you what, wait a minute. What I can do, shall I bring it a bit nearer to me? Is it better now if I speak like this?
Slightly better.
As I said, discussing with all you rather
Yeah.
speaking is less important, about the 5 dreams of Sri Aurobindo. Is that better?
Yeah, that's better. Yeah, it's much better.
Sure.
Good evening, Dr. Tharoor.
Hello, Shashi Tharoor here. Good to see you, Mark, and hello to the
Hello.
others.
Welcome
Hello,
on.
Shashi. How are you?
Very well.
Yes.
How are you?
We're just
Surprisingly well, I think.
Well, I've been through my bout of COVID, so I'm perhaps more cheerful having survived it. Yes.
Oh, well, that's, yes. We haven't, neither of us have yet, touch wood, been through the
Good.
hazards of COVID.
Do stay away.
I'm just
Well,
waiting for
at
Dr. Karan Singh. I don't know
Age
why.
of 85, it's not a very good idea to get COVID if you can.
Yeah.
Right. No, it has all sorts of nasty variants, and I got a particularly nasty one. So I have to admit that it's not a pleasant. Yes, I got something called COVID-induced viral myocarditis, which meant the conduction system of the heart was inflamed. I was having wonky heartbeats for a couple of months. Seems to be all right now.
And did you feel very tired or not?
During that time, yes,
Yes. Yeah.
incredibly exhausted. But that one slowly picked up steam after that. So I think I'm pretty much back to normal now, Mark.
Yes. Yes. Well, we were looking at the list of the books you've written today, and I should think for someone as active as you, the pain of inaction must have been particularly painful.
It was, but I did make progress on another book. So I have a table that sits on my bed, and I put my laptop on it and worked away. So that did happen.
Good. Yeah. There's Ameeta. Ameeta, hello.
Hi, Mark. How are you?
How are you? How are you?
Nice to see
Ameeta
you.
and I, Shashi, did a program together on BBC for Christmas, an hour-long
Oh, I see.
program. And I still get messages from people about how Ameeta's contribution was appreciated. And most importantly, it was appreciated by the BBC bosses.
That really matters, absolutely. It does indeed. Now, Mark, I'm a bit tight for time. So how are we going to organize this conversation? How is it going to go? Can somebody enlighten me?
That's not my doing at all.
I think Anu is the right person. She's just gone away for a moment. When she returns behind that curtain,
I think it's Anu doing it, isn't it?
we'd ask her. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anu is the moderator.
Yes.
Yes. My dog is insisting on participating. I don't know what we're going to do with him.
Oh, look, your dog. Your dog. Yes.
Down otherwise. But anyway, he can now pretend that
Is
he's
he
part of
on? Dr. Karan Singh? Where is he?
He hasn't come.
Okay.
Anu,
Yeah.
there was a question for
Yes.
you,
Go ahead.
not from me.
Sorry, Shashi Tharoor. I'm just I've got a bit of a time constraint. I'm actually supposed to be at another event. So this is for me a slightly squeezed in affair. Can you tell me how this is going to work out, this conversation this evening? How would you like?
Yeah, so I'll do a little introduce everybody, and we'll open the first, opening remarks, 3 to 5 minutes on the topic from each one. Now, we don't have Dr. Karan Singh, and I can't get through to him.
I'm
and
sorry
following that, we'll pick on some questions amongst, a couple of things that have come to me. So I'll just put those across to you. Or you can pick up anything else that you would like to take further. And the last 10 minutes, we're going to open it out to the house, to the, for questions. It's very simple, very straightforward. Don't you?
And so how long do you envisage the entire conversation? About 45 minutes, is that right?
It's about an hour, isn't that so? Shitish? 1 hour? Yeah, 1 hour.
Okay, well, with Dr. Karan Singh missing, I suppose that means we'll cut another 15 minutes from that. But anyway, let's see how it goes.
Well, yesterday he was very,
Is Dr. Karan Singh coming?
I've been trying to get through to him. It doesn't connect. So I hope
he was very insistent that I do this. He was very, very insistent that I do this. I expected to see him. But anyway.
He will definitely come. I know he'll come, but I'm sure he's having some internet problems. He's in Srinagar, so let me just call him.
Ah, that helps explain this, yes.
Oh, yes, yes. He may not have any internet.
It's not that bad anymore, Mark. They restored these. 1 second, I need to take this call.
Yeah, go ahead. We still have a couple.
Okay. Yeah, I called because of this message I sent you about this poor Afghan woman activist who needs to be evacuated from Kabul. Is there anything we can do to help? I know tonight is our last flight. Right. Oh, good. All right.
Anu, I think you should start. He'll join.
Let him just finish his call. All right. Maybe just go ahead. Okay.
Great. But we're not going to be able to help anyone jump the queue, I suppose. There must be quite a pressure there already. Yeah, that too.
Okay, here we go. Good evening. We welcome you all to the first Auroville webinar dedicated to the exploration of Sri Aurobindo's work and vision as we step towards his 150th birth anniversary. Thank you all for joining in such large numbers today. For those of you not familiar with him, here is a very brief glimpse. Sri Aurobindo, of course, is known as an evolutionary thinker, a philosopher, sage, poet, but he was also one of India's early revolutionaries who set India's freedom struggle on course with a call for complete freedom. He courted arrest twice for this and was about to be deported to the Andamans when he moved to Pondicherry. This began a very different spiritual chapter in his life and work. However, India and her struggle were never very far away. Soon after, he would comment that India was certain to be free, but what she would do with her freedom was a far greater concern for him, and part of the work he now had undertaken. Our topic today is Sri Aurobindo's Independence Day message for the 15th of August, 1947, which had been requested by the All India Radio. This text is also known as his 5 Dreams. To discuss their relevance today and to see how far they have traveled and the challenges ahead, we have with us a very distinguished panel, almost, with Dr. Karan Singh, who still hasn't been able to join us, Sir Mark Tully, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, Dr. Aster Patel, and Ameeta Mehra. We thank all of you for being with us on this session. But before we start, a quick round of introductions. I'm introducing Dr. Karan Singh anyway with the hope that he will be able to join us. He's in Kashmir. We all know him as an eminent scholar of Hinduism with several books of note, a philosopher in his own right, a philanthropist and a poet. He was also a former Indian ambassador to the United States, awarded the Padma Bhushan. But most importantly for us in Auroville, Dr. Karan Singh has served as chairman of Auroville Foundation's governing board, a position he has held for almost 20 years. We also have Mark Tully, who was the chief of bureau BBC in India for nearly 30 years. Tully remains a distinguished name among journalists and is the author of several books on India. He was knighted in 1985 by the Order of the British Empire and awarded the Padma Shri and the Padma Vibhushan by the Indian government as well. Most importantly for us in Auroville, he served on Auroville's International Advisory Council for nearly 10 years. We also have Dr. Shashi Tharoor, who hardly needs introduction. He's a former international civil servant. As a member of the UNHCR for refugees, he was responsible for leading peacekeeping operations in Yugoslavia prior to serving as Undersecretary at the United Nations. He's also a renowned author of books like An Era of Darkness, Why I Am a Hindu, The New World Disorder, and The Indian Imperative. He's also a well-known columnist with leading national and international papers and is a well-known public figure in India. Then we have Ameeta Mehra. Ameeta is a visionary and dynamic leader who heads the Gnostic Center in Delhi, dedicated to the work of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother with a very special emphasis on education. She went through an intensive study of integral yoga under the guidance of Dr. Nirod Baran, who was the literary secretary of Sri Aurobindo and has been one of the youngest serving members on Auroville's governing board. But additionally, she is also one of India's top horse breeders. And finally, Dr. Aster Patel, who grew up in the ashram in the presence of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother from childhood, did her thesis on Sri Aurobindo at the Sorbonne, and was asked by the mother to join Auroville. A well-known Sri Aurobindo scholar, she has held the Sri Aurobindo chair at the Banaras Hindu University and was also in charge of Bharat Nivas, which is the Pavilion of India in Auroville's international zone. She has been one of the longest serving members of Auroville's governing board. And finally, I am Anu Majumdar, a longtime resident of Auroville, a writer among a few other things, and currently member of Auroville's working committee and of the 150th year team. This evening session will run as follows. Each of our panelists is invited to share opening comments on the topic for about 5 minutes, with the exception of Dr. Aster Patel, from whom we will play a recorded video. Following that, there will be a round of questions for the next 20 to 30 minutes. And the last 10 minutes, we will take questions from the audience. So over to you now, Mark Tully, in the absence of Dr. Karan Singh. Would you share with us your opening comments?
And you could unmute my camera. I mean,
you'll have to unmute yourself. You need to unmute yourself.
I am unmuted, but my video cannot be started because the host has stopped it.
You'll need to unmute yourself, Mark. Yes.
Yes, there you are. Yes.
No, yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. So you want me to start?
Still don't hear him. What happened?
Anu, do you want me to start then?
Yes, please start.
Yeah, okay. Well, in the rereading the 5 dreams of Sri Aurobindo to prepare for this webinar, the thing that struck me most was the emphasis on unity, the importance of unity. And the first thought, of course, concerned the unity, the first dream concerned the unity of Hindus and Muslims. And that's not surprising considering the time when the dream was broadcast, which was the day before the partition actually took place. And Sri Aurobindo emphasized the essential nature of bringing Hindus and Muslims together. And he talked about India not being a complete union until that was done. And I think it's something to learn today that what Sri Aurobindo said then is something that we still need to work on. And we need to ask that question, is India a complete union yet regularly to keep the issue in mind? The third dream was the unification of the human world, which Sri Aurobindo thought was underway. And he said very strong language, only human imbecility, stupidity, and selfishness can prevent it. And for now, in these present times, there are 2 glaring examples of the lack of world union and the need for it in COVID and climate change. And climate change, I think, brings us very much to what Sri Aurobindo talks about, the fundamental, India's fundamental respect for unity, and particularly the unity of humanity and nature. And in Tagore said that the fundamental unity of creation was part of Indian and central part of Indian thought. And in fact, he said it was India's life object to achieve this great harmony in feeling and in action. And I think this fundamental understanding of the unity of humanity and nature is absolutely essential if we're going to solve the problems of COVID and, of course, of climate change. And then there's a question of the spiritual gift of India, which Sri Aurobindo raises. And here, I think it's tremendously important not to consider this in any triumphal terms or anything like that. Clearly, Sri Aurobindo thought that there was a great deal that India could teach the world and the world could learn. But he didn't see it in any sense in terms of the Vishwa Jagat or Guru Jagat or India's century or anything like that. Rather the reverse. He saw it very importantly, I believe, as the coming together of all religions into the universal religion. And I sincerely believe one of the most essential searches which we have, if we are to recover a sense of the sacred, is to search for what is the universal basis of all religions and what could be the universal religion. So those were the thoughts I had when reading. And I think all the issues I've made are absolutely crucial today. And I'm sure that Sri Aurobindo would have a lot to say about them all.
Thank you. May I invite Dr. Karan Singh? Happy to see you here. You'll have to unmute yourself. You'll have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we hear you now.
I've been sitting here for half an hour watching all of you, but you couldn't see me for some odd reason.
Yes.
Anyhow, here I am.
Very glad to see you. Well, we've done all the introductions. I hope you've heard us. I mean, you've heard me.
I have heard
would you?
I have
all
heard
right.
you.
Okay. So would you go ahead and give us your opening remarks?
Let me say, first of all, very warm Independence Day greetings to all of you. It's a very important day. And this day, next year, is going to be particularly important because it will mark the 75th birthday of Free India and also the 155th birthday of Sri Aurobindo. So 2022 is going to be a very important year. And I recall very briefly that during the centenary of his birth, we had this national committee set up by the Prime Minister Indira Gandhi under her chairmanship, and I was the vice chairman running it. We did a lot of very important things. For example, we got the Aurobindo Bhavan in Calcutta, which is the place where he was born. We got the Aurobindo Nivas in Baroda, where he lived for 12, 13 years. And we also got the collected works of Sri Aurobindo for the first time. So we'll have to make out equally important programs for 2022. And I think I've written to the Prime Minister suggesting that he set up a committee under his own chairmanship, and we can collect all the various ideas that have come from Aurobindo Society centers and other people around the AVI, and then they could be put together. That's the first thing I'd like to do. Secondly, I'm very happy to see my dear friend Mark Tully here again, looking as bright as ever. And of course, my dear friend Shashi Tharoor, very close, and Ameeta, who's always a great scholar, pleasure to talk to. Before I get to the dreams, I'm sorry but what I want to put before this webinar and the listeners, visible and invisible, is the 5 phases of Sri Aurobindo's life. I think it's important to understand that because it will put into perspective a lot of what Sri Aurobindo did and wrote. The 5 bhumis I call. The Janma Bhumi is Calcutta. Born in Calcutta in 1893, but was there for only 7 years. Then the Shiksha Bhumi was England. He went to primary school, he went to secondary school, he went to college in Cambridge, where he won all the prizes for Latin and Greek, so King's College in Cambridge. And that was the period when he began developing his interest in Indian nationalism. He was greatly influenced by Parnell and the other Irish freedom fighters, and also the Risorgimento in Italy of Mazzini and Garibaldi. So those were the 12 years in which he really developed his intellect. He learned Greek, he learned Latin, and he developed this revolutionary zeal, which comes out later in his work. Then the sadhana bhumi is Baroda. In 1893, Maharaja Sayaji Rao Gaikwad of Baroda visited England. And when he learned that there was a young, brilliant young man who had not joined the ICS, he immediately snapped him up. So from 1893 to 1905, Sri Aurobindo was in Baroda State Service. First of all, as private secretary to the Maharaja, then as a professor of English and French in the college and all. And that is why I call his sadhana bhumi, because that was where he began reconnecting with India. After having been out for 14 years, he started learning Sanskrit, learning Bengali. He was in touch with the revolutionaries in Calcutta. His brother Barendra Ghosh was very active among those revolutionaries. He met Maharashtrian Yogi Lele, where he started his yogic practices, and he had a series of powerful experiences. So those 12 years in Baroda prepared him for his fourth bhumi, which is his karma bhumi. The Janma bhumi, the Shiksha bhumi, the Sadhana bhumi, the karma bhumi was, of course, Calcutta. In 1905, Lord Curzon, imperious as he was, decided to partition Bengal, more or less along religious lines. And there was a tremendous upsurge of nationalism. The Congress moved from the drawing rooms and conference rooms of the moderates to the streets of the radicals. And great leaders like Bal Gangadhar Tilak, like Bipin Chandra Pal, like Lala Lajpat Rai and Sri Aurobindo emerged as the revolutionary leaders. And that was where Sri Aurobindo wrote his fantastic pieces in the Bande Mataram. Shashi, I don't know whether you've read them or not, but if you read them even today, you know your blood will race faster in your veins. What a mastery that man had over the English language. And that was the Alipur bomb conspiracy case, where he was sent to a cell in Alipur. It was an extraordinary case. I wish I could speak about it longer. I cannot resist the temptation of reading out for you what Chittaranjan Das said in his peroration. Mark, please listen to this. When Chittaranjan Das ended his defense of Sri Aurobindo, he said this: "My appeal to you is this, that long after the controversy will be hushed in silence, long after the turmoil and agitation will have ceased, long after he is dead and gone, he will be looked upon as the poet of patriotism, as the prophet of nationalism, and the lover of humanity. Long after he is dead and gone, his words will have echoed and re-echoed, not only in India, but across distant seas and lands. Therefore, I say that the man in his position is not only standing before the bar of this court, but before the bar of the High Court of History." Extraordinary peroration. How Chittaranjan Das was able to perceive that this man would once, at some point in time, become world famous. So that is the fourth bhumi. And the fifth bhumi is his yoga bhumi from 1910 to 1950, the last 40 years spent in Pondicherry. So it's important, I think, to remember these 5 phases of Sri Aurobindo. I'm sorry I've taken up my 5 minutes, Anu. I'll come back to the 5 dreams when you give me my second round. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a very interesting way, very comprehensive way, actually, to present his life. I'll request Dr. Shashi Tharoor to make his opening remarks.
Thank you very much. In fact, I'm glad that Dr. Karan Singh came in between with his very different and refreshing approach to the topic, because I'm going to really sound very much as if I'm echoing Mark Tully. I had thought of the topic in much the same way as Mark did, which is to look at the 5 dreams and evaluate them in the context of today's world. On the question of the revolutionary movement that would create a free and united India, I would agree with Mark that the key question is the question of unity, because Aurobindo, speaking as he was on the 15th of August, 1947, said very presciently, and I'll read the 3 sentences. The old communal division into Hindus and Muslims seems now to have hardened into a permanent political division of the country. It is to be hoped that this settled fact will not be accepted as settled forever, or as anything more than a temporary expedient. For if it lasts, India may be seriously weakened, even crippled. Civil strife may remain always possible, possibly even a new invasion and foreign conquest. India's internal development and prosperity may be impeded, her position among the nations weakened, her destiny impaired or even frustrated. This must not be, the partition must go. So his idea of unity was the unity of the old undivided India, which of course was not to be, but his prescience about how the seeds sown by that partition would in fact continue to impede India's growth and development, both in terms of her external relations with countries like Pakistan and other powers, and then her own internal relations between the communities. I think this is a very, very important dream that has not been fulfilled, that in fact, in many ways, his worst fears, his nightmares, if you like, instead of his dream, have been realized. On the second point, I'm a little more optimistic than Mark. I think the resurgence and liberation of the peoples of Asia and her return to her great role in the progress of human civilization, that has happened. I would argue that Asia has done remarkably well, better than anybody in 1947 could have dared predict. And certainly the prosperity of the vast majority of Asian countries is now simply a fact of life. And therefore, I would say that on that dream, Sri Aurobindo's dream has been fulfilled. The third one, however, the World Union, was actually predicated on the extinction of nationalism. I can go back to his actual speech. What does he say? He says, when he talks about the World Union, he says, nationalism will have fulfilled itself and lost its militancy, and would no longer find these things incompatible with self-preservation, the integrality of its outlook. A new spirit of oneness will take hold of the human race. Well, if there was briefly hope that that was happening, it has been snuffed out in recent years. And what we've seen for the last decade has been a rampant increase in nationalist sentiment in a number of countries, including some of the principal ones in the world, whether it is Donald Trump's America or Brexit Britain, or indeed Erdogan's Turkey and Modi's India. We have seen an increasing assertion of nationalism, which I think is at odds with what Sri Aurobindo had in mind when he expressed in his dream that there would be a fairer, brighter, and nobler life for all mankind. On the fourth point of the spiritual gift of India to the world, I'm of the view that he wasn't far off. I mean, he said that the spiritual gift has already begun. India's spirituality is entering Europe and America. This movement will grow. And amid disasters of the time, more and more eyes are turning towards it. In fact, 25 years after Aurobindo spoke those words, that's precisely what was happening. Whether it was Maharishi Mahesh Yogi or all the other spiritual teachers achieving worldwide renown, whether the Beatles coming to India, or all of these, this awakening to Indian thought, Krishnamurti in California. There were so many Indian spiritual thinkers who became world famous and whose ideas acquired a certain degree of acceptance that had not been quite there before. And so I think Sri Aurobindo was right in saying that, because it certainly developed in exactly that direction. But when it comes to the final dream, a step in evolution, which would raise man to a higher and larger consciousness, I honestly believe that was idealistic even when he said it. He was speaking 2 years after the savagest of world wars, with the horrors of the Holocaust and Hiroshima available to the world. How on earth could one have seriously expected at that point human beings capable of a higher and larger consciousness? I think he was deliberately setting the bar high. He was reaching out to the stars because that was his intellect, his mind, his consciousness. And he admitted in that particular dream, he said, this is still a personal hope and an idea, an ideal which has begun to take hold both in India and in the West on forward-looking minds. How many forward-looking minds there were is a matter for debate, in my view, because the truth is that he himself acknowledged when he talked about that dream that the difficulties in the way are more formidable than in any other field of endeavor. And then he said, but difficulties were made to be overcome. And if the supreme will is there, they will be overcome. Well, supreme will is there at one abstract level, but has it taken hold of the consciousness of humanity? I think very far from it. The world has become, if anything, more materialistic, more technologically minded, and less spiritual. And certainly the question of a higher and larger consciousness that he spoke about, I would contest if that's feasible. I would say that his 5 dreams are extraordinarily important lodestars, but I would argue that there's still a great distance to go before Sri Aurobindo's vision of the world as reflected in those dreams is brought close enough for us to see them as realistic. And then if you look at nuts and bolts things, nationalism is far from what he wanted. The question of the spiritual power being a powerful motivational force and a potent way of thinking about India's role in the world, I think seems much less credible, even though I would agree that the common actions that Sri Aurobindo called for are exemplified by the increased international cooperation, which certainly could not have been predicted by a lesser mind in 1947. In fact, I was reminded of Jawaharlal Nehru saying at the Tryst with Destiny speech the very same night that his dreams were not just for India, but for the world as a whole. And I think in many ways, the two of them both thought beyond the immediate realities to dream big. Neither of them could have been totally happy with the way in which their hopes have played out. But I think both of them really have articulated a vision that's worth aspiring to. So I'll end, I think, by saying that there's a great deal more that we need to learn from Sri Aurobindo. And if there is a quote of his that I would turn to when he speaks about India, I read it with a certain sense of almost regret that we are so far from that. He speaks of India and says, she does not rise as others do for herself, or when she is strong to trample on the weak. She is rising to shed the eternal light entrusted to her over the world. India has always existed for humanity and not for herself. And it is for humanity and not for herself that she must be free. That is an aspiration that certainly I know Dr. Karan Singh shares, that I admire, wish we could fulfill. But I think we will all of us on this panel will have to admit that we're still a long way from fulfilling that dream of Sri Aurobindo's. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Shashi Tharoor. That was actually what you just quoted was when he had stepped out of jail after 1 year, Alipur jail, after being, incarcerated there for the Alipur bomb case, and was released. And this was a famous Uttarpara speech. And that was already, I think, before his Pondicherry days. So, Ameeta, over to you. Let's see where you take this.
Very good evening. Yes, I have listened closely to the 3 esteemed speakers, and no doubt that reality as it's staring us today is rather bleak. There is all around us, especially those who are so deeply caught in public life, politics, and have their nose right up against the glass, find it extremely difficult to see how things are going to change. And we have, we have this particular way of looking at reality as a glass half empty or a half full. And as the mother said, that in the end, it's a question of, and she would use her hand, that, you put your hand this way, the consciousness changes, and you do it this, and it changes differently. So I'm going to try and, present to you the other side of the picture, which is perhaps the glass half full, with the caution that it is half full. I think for me, the important things that stand out in the 5 dreams that Sri Aurobindo wrote and which he broadcast on the eve of independence is how do we achieve unity? I mean, the speakers before me talked about not just freedom, but unity. The partition of now, of course, not only India and Pakistan, but also Bangladesh, which happened after 1947. And you know, we all know the spiritual map of India that the mother has put in the playground. So how do we achieve unity is the one question. The second, which I'm going to talk about, the other one is India's role in Asia's resurgence and the importance of the Council of Nations, the UN, the United Nations, and the fact that India needs to have a permanent place on it, which we don't have. But that is an important point. Then the European Union, the World Union, which Aurobindo spoke of, which was his 3rd dream, and how that is manifesting since he wrote it in 1947, with things like the European Union, SARC becoming extremely important, and of course the Berlin Wall, which nobody thought would ever fall, and bringing 2 peoples that were so disparate and would not have otherwise come together in a moment of history to come together. And then the voluntary fusion of cultures, which he mentions in the 3rd dream, which is definitely taking place today with internationalism being far more rampant, people from different cultures and religions and different countries commingling, living at the boundaries of nations becoming more porous, with, of course, some backlashes that are inevitable because, evolution doesn't always go in a straight line. Sri Aurobindo's very, very well-known evolutionary theory, he says evolution is a spiral. And every time we want to go up, we have to go down to go up. So it's a staircase that is a spiraling one. And I see, some of the things that Mr. Tharoor mentioned, the rise of certain nationalistic feelings in Trump's America and in other places of the world, and also in some rabid forms in our own country. I feel that all these are manifestations that have to rise up to be cleansed. And if we are to take the next step, we need to be able to see it. We need to be able to deal with it. And we can't just brush it under the carpet, because if we do that, it will take its vengeance. So it's like a disease that needs to be, you have to go through it. You've got to get well. And to get well, you've got to go through the whole pang and the pain of the disease. I see in these movements that are going on in the world presently, especially some of the darker ones, a beacon of light towards a kind of manifestation of these forces which are rising up in our world, in our societies, for us to be able to grapple with them, and for a certain resolution to come about, which can only come about if they are not suppressed and underlying, but actually rise up to be dealt with. Now, the 4th dream, the spiritual, actually there's one thing that I find the most important in the 5 dreams, and I want to mention that. It's written in the 3rd dream, where Sri Aurobindo sort of gives a prophecy. It's a very prophetic statement. He says, a new spirit of oneness shall take hold of the human race. Now this particular sentence, a new spirit of oneness shall take hold of the human race. How are we to take that? Are we to take that as something that he was hoping for, or something that will happen, or something that is in the in the process of taking place. My own optimistic, faithful stand is that this is happening. It has not happened as yet, but there are so many movements, often catastrophic, often disastrous, often dark and bleak, that are pushing us towards this particular movement of oneness of the globe. The very same things that Mark spoke of, COVID, that we spoke of in terms of climate change. I mean, do we have a choice today? Does the earth have a choice? Are we not being pushed into taking action on it? Of course, the more forward-looking minds would want the action to be taken immediately, and we are amongst those minds here. But let me tell you that the whole of humanity has to wake up, not just us, and not just a few. And the only way sometimes that nature finds to do that is through adverse means. As Sri Aurobindo says in his epic Savitri, he says, pain is the hammer of God to chisel man into greatness. Pain is the hammer. So the pain that we're going through with COVID, the pain that we're going through on our earth, the pain that we are experiencing and we are feeling, that is what is going to push us to come together, is what Sri Aurobindo sort of also indicates in these 5 dreams. He says a catastrophe could take place, but he says, I hope it doesn't. But I think small catastrophes are taking place. The 4th dream, I just want to mention just 2 words there, psychic and spiritual practice in the spiritual gift of India. Of course, India has to first become one and united before she can give any gift to anyone. And this unity has to come more in terms of a certain statesmanship in her political, what should I say, apparatus, a statesmanship where the 3 qualities of unity, harmony, and mutuality become part of the settled mindset of our governors in this nation, and a settled mindset in the collective consciousness. And only when that happens, a certain harmony, that is when India will rise, and only then can the spiritual gift of India go forth. In the meanwhile, of course, there are, of course, the great Sanatan Dharma, the spiritual yoga practices that are already all over the world. But I'm talking about her being the leader of the spiritual march. The 5th dream is what I want to dwell on a little bit, which is the step in evolution. This step in evolution, which Sri Aurobindo talks about, he says 2 things there. He says growth of the spirit, growth of the inner consciousness, and then he speaks about that this next step in evolution is perhaps the way towards the realization of his 5 dreams, or the 4 dreams, because unless there's a growth of consciousness, unless there is a collective feeling in the whole collective consciousness of mankind that we are one, that everything that happens to one affects the other, unity, mutuality, and harmony. If these 3 cornerstones will actually, what he's indicating here, will help to go towards this step in evolution. And this is where I think these strands of these 5 dreams, in my view, run concurrently. They are not linear. One doesn't happen after the other. They happen together, but there is a kind of ebb and flow. There is a kind of, upsurge of the light, and then there is the deluge of the darkness, as you can see. But that does not mean that there isn't light. So I think I'll stop there for the time being.
Thank you, Ameeta. Couple of questions there. I think we'll come back when we open it out for questions, but we have one last person who is not here on the panel. because we did a recorded session with her, Dr. Aster Patel. She was 15 years old when India was free. Well, I think Dr. Karan Singh, you said you were 16 years old, but she was 15.
I was 16, yes.
Right. And she was in Pondicherry where Sri Aurobindo was there. So I asked her a very personal question. What do you remember from that time? What happened in Pondicherry at that time? And at what point did the 5 dreams actually touch her? So she responds to that in this short video. You just bring that on, please.
I was 15 years old in the ashram, and it was 15th of August 1947. What I can say is that we had darshan of Sri Aurobindo and the mother. And the mother had a celebration in the ashram itself. All that I felt was that it was another year. The atmosphere was different at that time. But what would be interesting is to say something about what mother did that day in the ashram. She read out an invocation morning of 15th August 47. Just a few lines from that invocation I would like to read out and share. She said, "O our mother, O soul of India, mother who has never forsaken thy children, even in the days of darkest depression, guide us so that the horizon of freedom opening before us may be also a horizon of true greatness and of thy true life in the community of the nations. Guide us so that we may be always on the side of great ideals, and show to men thy true visage. As a leader in the ways of the Spirit, and a friend and helper of all the people." And she hoisted the spiritual flag of India, which is blue with a golden symbol of mothers, on the terrace above Sri Aurobindo's room. In the afternoon, thousands of people who had gathered for the darshan of August 15th assembled in the courtyard of the ashram and sang the Vande Mataram. Mother appeared on the first terrace, gave her darshan, and responded to the singing of the Vande Mataram by saying, "Jai Hind." Everything changed in Mother's action from then onwards. Followed the 50s. Sri Aurobindo left the body on December 5th, 1950. She actively concentrated on the merger of the former French territories with India, which took place in 54. As soon as that happened, she wrote to the President of India asking for Indian citizenship. That was the first step that she took. And
क्या हो गया इसको? हमारी तरफ से तो नहीं है ना कुछ?
No, it's not from your side. There's something over here. We're just looking at it.
Anu?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Just hold on.
We can continue.
Yeah, just please carry on.
Dr. Anu?
Yeah. Can you? Yeah. Okay. Just a moment.
So, Anu, what do we do?
Just a minute. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. We can't hear Aster.
So, okay, now I can hear you. Just hold on a minute. We're trying to fix it. Can you just carry on?
Yes, I think
Carry
we
on.
should just-
Yes, absolutely. Carry on.
She'd finished.
I think she's finished. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. No, she hadn't finished. Actually, it's her thing which stopped just now. All right. So there was a second part to it, which is actually interesting, but we're not going to get that. Okay. So let's just take a look at some of the issues which have just come up. And something which strikes me in all that you all are saying is the 5 dreams. They seem to have traveled a certain distance, all of them. The last one perhaps is the most ambitious and will take much more time to become visible. But the rest did. And somewhere there has been, the brakes have been put on. And that's not just in India, and we are seeing similar patterns everywhere, whether it's socially, whether it's politically, whether it's even, the natural disasters that we're seeing everywhere, whether that is climate change or something else, we don't really know. But all of that seems to coalesce at the same time. And I'd like to ask each of you, what do you think, what is the way out?
Are we not getting a second, Anu?
Huh?
Are we not getting a second chance each to speak?
Certainly. I'll just leave that question there and I'll go to you because I know you wanted to come back on the 5
Yeah,
dreams.
because you said that we'll get a second turn. That's why.
Yes, please go ahead and then we'll come back to that question.
Well, first of all, I don't think that message was broadcast by All India Radio. I think it just happened that the University of Andhra had written to Sri Aurobindo for a message. And that was the message, but I'm not quite sure about that. Ameeta knows more about that than I do. Well, let me come to the 5 dreams.
Yeah.
It was All India Radio, Tiruchirappalli, Karan
Yes,
Singh.
Tiruchirappalli, okay, good for them. Because
That
otherwise
was
we would have lost the thing.
Yeah.
We lost the thing, okay. Now, to come to the 5 dreams, I have the greatest admiration for Sri Aurobindo, but I will have to be, Ameeta, a little, what should I say?
I know.
Ruthless, if you like, although it's not a good word. Now, the first dream of the unity of the subcontinent, I think is totally unrealistic. The only way that could have been achieved or could be achieved was if SAARC one day or the other develops on the lines of the European Union. That was the only way really in which, after all, if Germany and UK and France could get over their centuries-old conflicts with the European Union, why can we not do it? But the only way that can happen is through an organization like SAARC. Otherwise, I don't see any way in which we can have that sort of a union again. Now, the second dream with regard to Asia, I agree that Asia has more or less done extremely well, and she has risen to her role. A lot of Asian countries have done. Mind you, China is also in Asia, remember that. And therefore, Asia has in fact grown remarkably. And I think Sri Aurobindo felt that Asia had to play a major role in human history, which it is beginning to do. I think on the second dream, he was bang on. The third dream, the third dream of a world union, which was a lovely, lovely idea, I'm afraid, again, seems to be, what is happening, in fact, is a reversal. I mean, nationalism has turned out to be much more resilient and much more powerful than we had thought. I mean, even Sri Aurobindo, who was the prophet of Indian nationalism, which is the name of my book, and Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore, both of them rose above nationalism towards the end. But we find that nationalisms are getting more and more entrenched. And so there are movements, of course. For example, the environmental movement is global. The interfaith movement, which I am involved, is global. There are lots of movements like that, which are global. But the idea that nationalism would be finally overcome is still a long way away. But we can certainly hope that that will happen one day. In the third dream, there is a sentence which not very many people mention. A catastrophe may intervene and interrupt or destroy what is being done. I've always felt an ominous sort of prophecy in these words. What is this catastrophe? Global change, climate change is a catastrophe. Maybe that's a prolonged catastrophe. Will there be a more immediate catastrophe? What will happen? So we have to be very, very cautious. I think the best we can do is to try and strengthen these global movements, whether it is Rotary, whether it is these global organizations, global movements, to counteract the reversal to very, very aggressive nationalisms around the world. The fourth dream, he is absolutely correct. He has not mentioned Vivekananda, but I will mention Vivekananda. He was the one who spearheaded the entree of Indian thought into the West. Sri Aurobindo himself was a great admirer of Swami Vivekananda. In fact, he has recorded that when he was in Alipur jail, he heard the voice of Aurobindo guiding him for 15 days in the yoga. So Vivekananda was the one who started it. And then, as Shashi says, there's been a whole host of people, ISKCON or Maharishi Mahesh Yogi or whatever you want to mention, large numbers. The Auroville International, for example, itself is one of the attempts to spread the message of Sri Aurobindo. So a lot of very good vibes are coming from India, I think, to the West. Now the last one is, I think Ameeta is probably more spiritually advanced than I am, so she may have touched the supramental. I regret that I have not yet been able to do that. And Sri Aurobindo himself says that this is going to be very, very difficult. It remains his personal hope, as Shashi has said. And he said it very clearly. He didn't say that this was going to be the universal religion or something. It's his personal hope. But we must strive for the personal hope all the time, even though it may be very difficult to achieve. So this is how I see the 5 dreams, a remarkable vision of this man who was sitting in Pondicherry. And one interesting thing I'd like to say, Shashi, remember this. Only one of the 5 dreams are concerned with this supramental. The rest are all concerned very much with what is happening. You see, what has happened is his stature as a yogi has tended to overshadow his continuing interest in politics and in world affairs. The same thing happened with Gurudev. His stature as a poet has overshadowed his excellent writings. His Religion of Man, for example, is one of the finest series of lectures. So that's what happens to these great icons. They are put on a pedestal and everybody thinks they are talking only about the supramental. Only one of the 5 dreams, only 20%, shall we say, of all the dreams dealt with the supramental. That's not to in any way denigrate the supramental, but to point out that Sri Aurobindo's interest remained in politics and the welfare of the world. Now, to end that rather grim analysis on a lighter note, I remember learning, Shashi, a limerick. Mark, this amused you, many years ago when I was very young. And it goes like this. God's plan made a hopeful beginning, but man spoiled his chances by sinning. We know that the story will end in God's glory, but at present, the other side's winning. Thank you.
That's excellent. I think that's marvelous.
So that is actually my question, which I put back to you, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, and to Mark Tully once more, is that, as Dr. Karan Singh just said, that it's only the very last 2 dreams which deal with spirituality and the evolution of consciousness. But the first part, the first 3 dreams which have traveled to a certain point have come to, the brakes are on, and not just in our country, it's everywhere in the world. It's a similar situation, and nature is also reacting. So what is that turning point? It seems to me the 4th and the 5th dreams point to some kind of a turning point which is needed, another power, let's say, because so far we've relied on economic power and political or social or whatever, even climate change. But perhaps what he means or he's pointing to is that we need to harness something further. And, you know, at the same time, I'd like to just bring back the reference to one of his major books on social and political thought, which is The Ideal of Human Unity, which actually reads like a textbook now. Everything he said about the wars and the UN and everything. And at that point, he's talking about the commercial growth, the technological growth of the world and where it would finally lead us. And the only way that would change or have any hopes of transition is through the spiritual power. So I'd like both of you to comment on that.
I will be fairly brief because unfortunately, as I'd mentioned to Dr. Karan Singh earlier, I will have to go to an event at 8:30. But I just wanted to say very simply that as far as the larger issues are concerned, I don't disagree with you. Where will this come from? In some ways, it's interesting looking at the Auroville experiment in his name, which of course is after his lifetime, because the cooperation of people across various origins of ethnicity, nationality, religion, and so on, in a larger pursuit of humanistic cooperation with each other, seems to me perhaps in some ways fulfilling on a very small scale the kind of idea that he would have had for a global unity of purpose, of cultural cooperation, even of fusions. I think he had made an interesting comment about dual citizenship being a good thing once, which of course our country still hasn't signed on to that. If one were to look seriously at your proposition, I don't think I have a definitive answer as to where this turning point can come from. If anything, as I said, the last dozen years or so have dispirited me as somebody who spent nearly 3 decades of his life working for international cooperation at the United Nations and seeing it evolve in a positive direction. I have been disheartened by the considerable slipping back we've seen in the last decade. One of the questions that came into your chat room and to the question and answer box was about the horrors that are unfolding in Afghanistan even as we speak. While we've been together, the president of Afghanistan has fled the country. The reason I was taking those calls, that was a foreign minister calling, because we are trying to get people out of the country into India, and we may well be running the last possible flight out of there. It's an extraordinarily horrific situation, and difficult to feel any great sense of optimism that this is an inevitable process. I rather like the spirit of Dr. Karan Singh's limerick. In the end, God's glory will prevail. But right now, definitely the other side is winning, and certainly right next door in Afghanistan, we are seeing them win as well. And as somebody has pointed out, culturally and civilizationally, there was a time when Afghanistan was part of the Indian story, Gandhara and so on. So when you look at that, I'm sorry to say that I don't feel, but I do want to end on a slightly more positive note, which is that the aspirational value of Sri Aurobindo's 5 dreams, the fact that he had that vision, that soaring vision for India and for humanity, and that it's worth striving towards, that's where I would leave it. With my excuses to Dr. Karan Singh and Sir Mark, Ameeta, and yourself, Anu, I will have to abandon you now. But thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to contribute to this very, very enlightening discussion.
Thank you, Shashi,
for being with us.
Thank
Thank
you, Dr. Karan Singh. You were the one who insisted. I'm delighted to have been here. Thank you.
All right. We'll get you on at another time. Mark, would you like to go on the same?
Yes, well, I would be quite brief on this. Well, first of all, I would say that I do agree with what Ameeta says. I think it's very important that we shouldn't or not be overcome by pessimism. I think we should regard these things which we see, which need to be tackled, need to have something done about them, as in a way that signals which will actually lead to us doing something about them. And I think the most important turning point, most important, I think it's not the right way to put it. I think a crucial turning point could be coming with climate change, because every time you Sri Aurobindo said, you see fires raging everywhere, for instance, right at the moment. And, you know, with climate change should surely come an awareness of the fact that the way we have been living our lives, the dominant thoughts which have guided us, are barren, materialistic, and do not lead to the fundamental understanding, from my point of view, which is so important in climate change, the one I quoted Tagore as saying, the unity of man and nature. Because so many of our problems, both I think spiritual and also certainly material, spring from the fact that we have misinterpreted the first chapter of the book of Genesis, of the first chapters, and we have think that God has given us the charge of the world to do what we want with it. And I think the realization that that is not so, which has come to the Pope incidentally, is perhaps going to be a major turning point.
Right, thank you. Ameeta, would you like to add something here at this point? Or would you like to say, from your point of view, what are the steps needed, you know, parallelly, if you'd like to go there?
I agree with Mark. I agree with Dr. Karan Singh that you know, we need to strike a note of optimism, because in the end it is faith that actually makes us human and makes us want to strive. If we lose that, then we have nothing. I also want to say that the earth, we were talking about what is this next step in evolution. I think, you know, I would define it more in terms of the effect it has. And I would say that what he speaks about in the fifth dream is Sri Aurobindo's, what should I say, vision or sense, his feeling, because his whole, if you look at the entire body of his work, not just the five dreams, but if you look at the Life Divine, you look at Savitri, you look at the Synthesis of Yoga, you look at his future poetry, all of them are saying the same thing. And they're all going to the same note, the same, touching the same harmonic note, which is that humanity, that evolution is not over. There is a movement in evolution, and as our human consciousness grows and evolves, it will grow towards a oneness, a unity, a harmony, and there will be a sense of mutuality. Now, I think that when he talks about the fifth dream, the next step in evolution, it is not just you know, something that he is, what should I say? It's, for me, it's a reality that that exists. Like the realities of darkness, there is the realities of light, and both exist. It depends on which way you turn, and which is your calling. I just want to say that the earth, as Mark so well put it, is the mother, is the goddess, is the spirit. And it is the earth that is now calling us through her agony of and her climate change. So wherever we look, whether it's matter, it's material life, it's technology, it's bringing us together. Today we're having a Zoom conference with Dr. Karan Singh in Srinagar. And everywhere, and you know, the US and the whole world is coming together. I can't see how we're going to escape this spirit of oneness. And I believe that it is already taking hold of the human race. But I also think that we have a long way to go in terms of the road that we have to take for its full realization. Its fruition will take time, but I think its movement has certainly begun.
I know I have a small point to make, if I may.
Yeah.
If we look at the Atharva Veda, the hymn to the earth, Bhumi Suktam. There are 72 verses there which contain the most integrated and holistic approach to the environment that you can find anywhere in the world. So in our culture, we have this background of the great Vedic vision of the earth as the mother, as a living organism who is worshipped. That's why before we do any building, we do a Bhumi Pujan. We worship the earth before we put anything on it. So I think this concept of the divinity of the earth, along with, as I said, environmental movements, along with technology that is cutting across barriers, along with the interfaith movement, all of these taken together can become countervailing factors to the negative situation that we see. So I'm by no means negativistic about it. In fact, I think that each one of us, and I've just turned 90, by the way, I'm a COVID survivor also. Each one of us has got to strive in our own way, in our own consciousness, to bring down that light or to achieve that light. I would say to rise to it rather than bring down. And therefore, each one of us has to strive as human beings to do our bit to save the world from catastrophe.
Absolutely. Well, for
Can I just say one brief thing?
Please.
I put it in a very simple way like this as well. And that is that when we come to the question of climate change, which I think could be a fundamental point in a point of change in a way. What distresses me is the fundamental that so much which is talked about climate change is still in itself so materialistic. And the two things which are just not being said. One is what we've all been talking about, Earth being our mother. And the other is the very simple thing, that our lives would be so much happier, we'd live so much better in so many different ways if we did something radical about climate change, instead of getting involved in a lot of what I can only call materialistic arguments about, who will emit what and how much they'll pay for it.
Yeah. At the same time, just looking at all these images of, amazing, huge forests that are burning. So these are trees, that's the earth which is calling for help. And for that, we need another power. And that's another power for humanity to harness. And perhaps that is the evolution. Mother Earth has to be saved for sure. But she needs that force to be brought down. And it's through us. I mean, that is part of the work. I mean, that's how I read the last dream somehow. But I think we are almost running out of time, but fortunately, I think we can run Aster's video. We're going to give it a try, and perhaps we can close with that. So we can go off to where we left off and restart it there.
Follow the 50s. Aurobindo left the body on December 5th, 1950. She actively concentrated on the merger of the former French territories with India, which took place in 1954. As soon as that happened, she wrote to the President of India asking for Indian citizenship. That was the first step that she took. And in that decade of the 50s, all the leaders of public life in the country and all walks of life came to pay their respects to Mother and to visit the ashram. To name just a few, Dr. Radhakrishnan, Pandit Nehru, Indira Gandhi, up to Vinoba Bhave, and the literary figures and the people in the field of education. And they carried back in their respective areas of work in the country the work and mission of Aurobindo and the existence of the ashram. After that, I went to the Sorbonne in Paris to read again the work of Sri Aurobindo in the context of European thought and culture. That's when the 5 dreams came into a very clear focus for me and of great immediate relevance. In fact, the leave the chevet at that time for me was that essay of Sri Aurobindo called The Renaissance of India, which was signed by him. And the 60s was a time of great change. India had achieved her freedom. Most of the Asian countries had achieved their freedom, which was the first dream of Sri Aurobindo's. The second dream of a world union was beginning to take shape already. The common market, the European Union taking shape in Europe with whatever difficulties. But the third was already on the way. Late 60s was a tremendous shake-up in the civilization of Europe and America, in the field of education, in the field of social living, in the field of new ideas of the future. By that time, international organizations, the international institutions like the United Nations in New York and its subsidiaries in judiciary, in culture, in education and labor were set up all over the world. That had already happened after the Second World War. So that was a fact which was like a preparation for the kind of upheaval that already took place late 60s and early 70s. A certain period of human civilization. We have done well with it, no harm. We have reached awards, we have made discoveries, but it's finished.
So that was Aster. We actually have a longer recording of what she said, which carries on from there.
Your voice.
Yes?
Your voice.
Oh, what's happening to my
My
voice?
voice.
Oh, better.
Is that
It's
better?
better
now?
now. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So we'll upload Aster's complete recording on the website, on the Sri Aurobindo website that we have launched.
And
because
my
I-
speech
you know-
on the 5 dreams, my video.
Yes, we will also insert that, and we will also post that one and a couple of others which are coming very
That I
soon.
spoke in Ameeta's institute.
Yes, and Mark, we'd like to hear from you, Ameeta also, and we'll also request Dr. Shashi Tharoor. I mean, it's interesting that we are hitting, at the same time, we are hitting a wall, but that wall has to be pierced. And that wall has to take history through, take humanity through. So that for me are the last 2 dreams, and how we find the way through that wall is what remains to be seen. So I think our time is up. Is that so? Yeah. So unless any one of you has anything else to
We have
say.
lots to say, but
I just have a tiny point for Dr. Karan Singh that I read the 5 dreams on the, I think it's the, maybe it's the Auroville website. And there it does say that these were broadcast on the 14th of August, 1947
all right. I stand corrected.
on India Radio.
I stand corrected.
The other one was a request from Andhra University. That came, I think, a year or 2 later. And that's also very interesting, actually, to look, because that sees a couple of other things in Asia. There are other comments there. Yeah. Dr. Karan Singh, any last words there?
No. Was it recorded in Sri Aurobindo's own voice, are you saying?
No, it wasn't, unfortunately.
No, it
It
wasn't.
was read, yeah, it was read by someone
Somebody
else.
read it out. All right.
Yes,
Yes.
Yes.
but the recording does not exist anymore. I think the ashram has looked for it, but we have no trace of his voice.
No.
there's just the imagination of what it may be. Yeah. Okay, thank you all of you for
Thank
joining
you.
us.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And let's
Thank
hope
you.
this
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's
And
very-
National
perhaps
Committee
we'll
comes
find
up
other
soon.
ways to come back through this long year of the 150.
It's only the beginning. We've
It's
only
only the
begun.
beginning. Right.
We have a whole
We're
year
on
ahead of us.
We're on a very early start. Actually, we can take 2 years if you want, but anyway, that's how it works. Thank you once more.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Yeah,
Namaskar.
and
Namaskar.
bye-bye. Yeah.
Bye.
Yes.
Bye.
And thank you
Bye, Mark.
everybody for joining. There's so many
Bye.
people enjoying the
Bye,
wonderful.
Dr. Karan.
Yes.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Yeah.
Bye, Mark.
Bye. Very happy occasion
Yeah.
and meaningful as well.
Yeah. So how do we happen?
Kashmir is glorious at this time. Glorious, Kashmir.
Beautiful.
Unlike Delhi, which is not glorious.